so that we can have a record of what we covered today. I have started recording this meeting, but thank you for everyone that has started joining. We will get started officially in 2 more minutes, but I'm very excited to talk today. This was a big question that we got during last week's presentation that I felt like I didn't adequately cover, and so now we have a whole session dedicated to it, which is really exciting. And it's something that I would say is the most common question that I get. And I actually am going to turn off the air. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not, but since we have a couple more minutes before we actually get started, I did want to turn off the air here so that that's not bothering us while we are talking about UX. But yeah, feel free to type in the chat at any point in the presentation. Even if I don't get your question right away, I will make an effort to try to answer everyone's questions once we complete this presentation. That way we can have a dialogue and a discussion after the presentation. I am going to try and keep things shorter than I did last week. I think that we can have just as much of an impact with the information I have to share with you all in a shorter format. You know, and this is the second one of these things, so I am still working out the kinks and stuff, and I just really appreciate all of you signing up and taking interest and taking part in this sort of thing. But today I really wanted to cover the UX process, and we've got 1 minute remaining before we officially start. We'll be covering everything from techniques and methods to the life cycle of the UX process. I mean, it says it right there. It's all about the UX process. We won't get super into the nitty gritty. We will have a couple of examples. I'll try and be as concrete with my examples as I can, but this is definitely supposed to be more of an overview of what the UX process is. And then in future seminars, we can definitely cover things in more detail, but I'll share with you, it's 6 o'clock, so we can get started now. Thank you guys so much again for joining. I see there's quite a few participants on the meeting. I'm very excited. But I did want to just start off by saying thank you so much for coming. This is definitely something I felt like was important as we start this workshop series, and we do have one of these every single week now. This is the second one in the series, and I felt like this is definitely an appropriate second step for us to take when learning about UX, is trying to understand the UX process, right? Because last week we learned all about the definition of UX, a little bit of the history, but mostly focusing on what is the definition of UX and what is UX design and what is it not. This week we are covering the UX process, which is probably the most commonly asked question that I get. What process should I be using? And it's the most commonly asked interview question you'll be asked if you try to interview as a UX designer. So that being said, I did want to mention briefly that I do offer services. If you need help building your UX portfolio, I offer customized templates. I can help you with your web design if you're setting up a website. If you're interested in any of those sorts of services, if you need some assistance building your UX portfolio or understanding what kind of structure you should be building your UX portfolio around, if you need help creating content, mock projects, that sort of thing, those are all things that I can help you with. Just email me at Catherine@fairbankstudios.com after this presentation, or right now, whatever suits you. But I would definitely be interested in helping you guys with this, and I hope that I can help you get the job of your dreams. So we will keep on going. And I guess the right keyboard button does not work because I tried that and it didn't really work. But today's agenda is going to be covering UX processes, life cycles, methods, and techniques. So those those 3 kind of areas of the UX process, it's all UX process. And there is not really a universal definition for these things, right? Like, there are different theories in UX, and What I've tried to do in this presentation is focus on the fundamentals and focus on the most universally accepted methods for UX design, according to the most recent literature we have available, according to experts like the Nielsen-Norman Group, and also taking a lot of help from the UX book too. This is the same textbook I recommended last week, and it's what I would recommend if you were to buy one UX textbook. This is probably what I would recommend, just because it's very thick, but it is very good about providing a modern approach, a well-rounded approach to UX design, and it helps you understand the things you really do need to know if you're going to be a UX designer. So we'll be covering the need for process. Why do we need a process in UX design? The basic process components. What are all of the pieces that make up this process? And we are going to put that together in a diagram. I have a very probably the most helpful thing in this presentation, in my opinion, is the fundamental UX life cycle diagram. That is going to be the kind of biggest point I'm going to make throughout this whole presentation, is showing you guys that life cycle, because those are all of your pieces of the UX process laid out for you plain as day. But we will dig into each of those sections of the UX life cycle by explaining what each of those points on the circle mean, and then we will also talk a little bit about choosing and appropriating UX processes, methods, and techniques, because this is not necessarily, there is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to product design. Every project is going to be a little bit different. So this is supposed to be a framework helping you gather your thoughts and helping you create the best product possible, and kind of bucketing each of those parts of the UX process so that you will come up with the most wonderful result you possibly can. So first, though, we're going to talk about the need for process. Why do we even need a UX process? Why the heck does every interviewer ever ask about what your UX process is? Why is that expected of you when you are a UX designer? Well, the need for process is pretty easy to understand. I think the main point that I think rings the most true in my personal experience, as well as in the literature I read, is that without guidance from a UX design process, we as designers are forced to just make things up as we go along. It provides a lot of structure, and it's just something that without it, we might be a little lost and not understand how to make the best product possible. So in the next slide, we're going to be talking about the main things you get when you have a process in place. So what do you get by having a process? First of all, process is a guiding structure. A process is a guiding structure that helps both beginners and experts deal with the complex details of a project. A process enforces a systematic approach, bringing order to what could be a very chaotic, especially within a large and complex project, very chaotic situation. It helps both beginners and experts equally, so it doesn't matter how new or how old you are to UX, you still need a process, which is important when you have such varied skill levels working on one project on a team. For beginners, this process acts as a framework to keep you on track and help you create a quality product. For experts, this process can act as a checklist to make sure no important pieces are missing. I also wanted to talk about how process offers reliability and consistency. I'm just going to scroll down my notes here. This works because it is a documented process, offers a way to use basically the same approach from project to project and from one team member to another. So it allows consistency on the client side, because can you imagine, it's somewhat okay if you are a designer working on your own, but when you get to a company-wide level where you're working on teams of lots of designers, you want to set up consistency from project to project and from designer to designer so that your client knows what to expect and knows what to expect, what kind of quality of work is going to come out of that process. You know, the whole phrase, trust the process, definitely rings true here. So process also offers a scaffolding for learning. Design is all about learning. A process provides a fabric on which you can build a knowledge base of what you have learned, applying organizational memory from similar previous efforts to incorporate lessons learned in the past. So by repeating this process over and over again from one project to the next within your company, you will start to develop lessons learned and just create better and better products as you move along. And finally, process provides a shared conception of what you are doing. A documented process lets everyone know how a product or system is being developed. It is the best communication tool among team members, providing a common understanding. So, what are these components in this process? I want to talk to you guys in this section about the definition of the UX design lifecycle. What are all of those pieces? What is this magical process you're talking about? What are all the pieces of the process? So this, again, I mentioned this before we got started, and I will repeat it for those of you just joining. The UX process is not something that we have a universal definition of. And you might know this already if you've had a couple of UX design jobs. Every designer is going to have a slightly different idea of what the UX process is. And honestly, that's okay. This presentation, I tried to focus on the most up-to-date literature that we have. I try to focus on input from experts such as the Nielsen Norman Group and the UX Book 2, which is the textbook I recommend for UX designers. Probably my #1 recommended book, as well as just, you know, experts in the field and the most up-to-date literature to try and define kind of the most universally accepted method for design. And even though UX is kind of a newer field in terms of design as a field in general, as product design in general, because obviously products have been around a lot longer than, you know, something a UX designer would typically work on. We do have some standard ways of looking at design and design process that play a part in this life cycle definition I'm about to share with you. So, what is the UX design life cycle? Life cycle activities are the high-level things you do during a life cycle. It is representation of how you put the life cycle activities together in a sequence over time and how the life cycle activities are connected in the flow of the process. So here's the bare bones concept of the UX design process. You will need to understand the user's needs, understand the user's work and their needs, really define the problem. Then you're going to design solutions. You're going to create design concepts meant to solve this problem. Next, you will prototype candidates. You will realize design alternatives. Is one solution better than the next? You're going to need to then take your design solutions and test them and figure out which ones are better than others. Are there parts of one that we should be using, but parts of another that we should be using as well, and kind of make some kind of mash solution that provides a better concept, a better project than we would have otherwise. And then next we have evaluate UX, which after we're prototyping, after we're testing our candidates, which what I mean by candidates is just, you know, all of the options that we come up in the design phase, all of the projects that we've created, we have to evaluate those and see where we can refine the design, what parts are working, what parts are not working. And then we will move back into user needs, understanding needs. So say you have a minimum viable product, an MVP, you have your project that's done, you've tested it with users, and you are ready to release it into the real world. Well, you still have to go back again and understand the user's needs. Have they changed since you've created this product? How are people reacting to it? How can we make it better? Then you'll come up with more design solutions. How can we redesign parts of this product to make it better? And then we'll go into prototyping. What alternatives do we have? What different solutions have we come up with? And then we'll go back into evaluating again. So I also wanted to add these little caveats into my life cycle here. This is not something I came up with on my own. This is straight from the textbook, and I think it offers a pretty universally accepted basic understanding of what the UX process is. So literally, this is just straight from the textbook, and I think it's the best representation of the UX process that I have been able to find. If we expand this cycle a bit to include feedback and iteration, we get a kind of UX lifecycle template. With each rotation you take in this cycle, you get a little bit closer to a quality final product. This basic picture is the blueprint for the process common to almost any kind of design. It applies whether the design scope is just a small piece of a product or system or it's the whole system. To understand needs is to understand users, work, practice, usage, the subject matter domain, and ultimately the needs for the design. So that's kind of this first piece over here on the left. Design solutions means to create designs as solutions. Prototype candidates, which is done of promising solutions, design solutions you've come up with in the design solutions phase that have looked good. You're going to then prototype those candidates in order to realize and envision promising design candidates. And then you will evaluate, you will verify and refine the designs with respect to the user experience that they afford. And I see that just the group chat work. Can everyone, is everyone able to chat? Can someone type in the chat maybe and show me that it's working? I just want to make sure if you have any questions that I'm able to answer those. And it looks like maybe it's not working because I'm not getting anyone in the group, Zoom group chat. But that's all right, we'll move on. Hopefully I will fix that at the end and definitely get your questions so that we can answer them. But like this displays, there's a lot of iteration when it comes to UX design. You want to iterate on your design in order to create the best product possible. And so you will redo and redo and redo things in order to get the best product possible. So the fundamental UX lifecycle activities. In this section, we will look more in depth at the individual UX design activities and sub-activities. So this little table, I think, explains well it's kind of an informal hierarchy of processes, methods, and techniques with specific examples. So to distinguish the levels among descriptions of ways things can be done in UX design, we end up with a kind of hierarchy and terminology outlined here on the left side of our table. We start with the lifecycle process, which is that big circle diagram we saw earlier. A waterfall process is one of the earliest formal software engineering lifecycle processes. It is an ordered linear sequence of lifecycle activities, each of which flow into the next like a set of cascading tiers of a waterfall. So the lifecycle process is made up of a lot of lifecycle activities. So this hierarchy is informal and not rigidly defined in the field. I have instead taken this hierarchy from the UX book 2, which for the sake of these workshops will give us a working definition that creates a good frame of reference to start to carve out as a universally accepted example of the UX design process as we can, based on the most up-to-date practices in the field. So you've got these lifecycle processes in here with the, that's made up of lifecycle activities. An example of a lifecycle activity is understanding user needs. And that is just in reference to, if you saw early in the presentation, understanding needs is one, design solutions is one, prototype candidates is another, and evaluate UX. So you've got 4 of those. Under understanding needs, you're going to have sub-activities. So elicit usage information, analyze usage information, model a system or product usage. These are all sub-activities. And then below that, each sub-activity contains methods. So in order to elicit usage information, you might do usage research. You might see how many clicks someone is taking on a web page, for example. And under methods, you then have your technique. So how are you capturing these results? Is it through interviews? Is it through observation? Is it through diagramming? These are all different ways that you can carry out these methods. So I did want to cover kind of some definitions of, sorry, I think my slides are out of order on this. Okay, here we go. We're good. We're good. So let's dig into more into the understand needs UX lifestyle activity. There are several sub-activities that UX designers can use to understand a user's needs. We can dig into each of these sub-activities in detail in later presentations, but for now, this is a good overview. These sub-activities include data elicitation, which involves interviewing and observing users at work and gathering data about work practice, users, usage, and needs. So if, for example, you're creating an app for a bank, you'd want to first go into a bank and witness the process. Data analysis is means to distill and organize research data. Data modeling means to create representations of user characteristics, information flow, and work environments for collaboration, sharing, rehearsal, and immersion. And what I mean by immersion is basically to form a deep thought and analysis of the problem at hand, to live within the context of the problem and to make connections among the different aspects of it. This sounds a lot like empathy. I think as UX designers, we are supposed to be empathetic because that helps us to understand the process, the problem at hand, and actually solve that problem by truly trying to live in that person's shoes. Finally, the final sub-activity I wanted to touch on is requirements extraction, to codify needs and requirements. So think about having a bowl of M&Ms and only picking out the red ones. What are the most important ones here? What are the pieces that we really care about when we're doing these activities to try and understand someone's needs? We then need to sort through all of the data we've collected and understand which pieces of information are going to help us create a better product. So this illustrates, I think, pretty well the data elicitation sub-activity as it is done with possible methods and techniques. So maybe you are manually taking notes, right, while you're observing and interviewing users. And that is basically how you're going to elicit usage information, which is for the purpose of usage research. And then that is also for the life cycle activity of understanding needs. So all of these steps, it's kind of this funnel system. It's just how do we really understand a user's needs? Well, we're going to take notes while we are observing and interviewing users. So next, we're going to talk about design solutions. We'll talk about all 4 of the life cycle activities. So this is number 2. We've got design solutions. Design solutions is perhaps the most important life cycle activity and the one with the broadest purview. Sub-activities include generative design, ideation and sketching to create design ideas, low fidelity prototyping, and critiquing for design exploration. Conceptual design, creating mental models, system models, storyboards, low fidelity prototypes of conceptual design candidates. Intermediate design, that means you're going to be developing ecological interaction and emotional design plans for the most promising candidates, creating illustrated scenarios, wireframes, medium fidelity mockups of design forerunners, and identifying design trade-offs to compare design candidates. So design trade-offs might be, well, if we do X, we might not have time to do Y, or if we do X, then the developers aren't going to be able to do Y. Or if we do X, we're not going to be able to afford Y, right? Those are kind of some of the trade-offs and decisions you have to make when you're creating a product. Design production, that is going to be, specifying detailed design plans for implementation of the emerging design choice. And the relative importance of each of these sub-activities depends on the design situation, especially the kind of product or system being created. So it's going to vary from product to product, but this is a good framework. So typical sub-activities of this activity change dramatically over time as the project and the product evolve and mature through these basic stages, but this is roughly how they fit together in a flow. So you've got design creation, right? You've got ideation and sketching, innovation, low fidelity prototyping. Then you're going to move into conceptual design, matching user mental models to a system model. Then you're going to be moving into intermediate design, information architecture, screen layout, navigation, medium fidelity prototyping. And once you've gotten past the intermediate design stage, then you'll be moving into design production, which is going to be a little bit more styled. This is where we get into things like style guides and color and making things look like, making the mock-up very high fidelity, and in order to start to get to the point where we can hand things off to developers and create the product. So prototyping candidates. Here, prototyping is a full-fledged lifecycle activity to realize and envision promising design candidates. So you have all your designs, now what are you going to do with them? The main subjectivity is to create representations of design to required fidelity in the form of paper prototypes. This is a very quick way to bring your ideas to life in a way that is interactive. So maybe you are going to just tear up pieces of paper and draw an iPhone and kind of use layering to create a workable paper prototype, as you can see in the photo here. That's a really quick way to get a prototype together of your design that can be user tested. But typically the ones that are more common are things like wireframes and wireflows, click-through wireframe prototypes. If you've ever used InVision, they are a pretty typical software that designers will use to create clickable prototypes. And so that you can give the clickable prototype to a user and they will be able to actually click through your app on their phone or click through the website on their browser, but it's not going to be a developed product, it's going to just be prototypes. And that's all stuff that designers create on a regular basis. There's also physical prototypes. So these are all, and that applies more to, less to like the app in the web design world and more to kind of the product design world. So if you wanted to create a, something that you physically, tangibly have, some kind of new invention, you might want to create a physical prototype, game controller, that sort of thing. So next I wanted to talk about the next part of our life cycle activities, that's evaluating UX. So this activity is about verifying and refining UX design to ensure we are getting the design right. Sub-activities and possible alternative methods for the evaluate UX activity, assess, verify, and refine designs must include to collect evaluation data, evaluate designs with empirical or analytic methods to simulate or understand actual usage and produce evaluation data. You want to analyze that evaluation data, identify root causes, critical incidents, things that might have gone wrong. And then you want to propose redesign solutions for all of those kind of errors or negative things, not even necessarily negative things, but areas that you find that you can improve your product. You'll want to propose redesign solutions. And then the next thing you'll want to do is report results. So you will want to communicate with your client, your boss, whoever is in charge of this product that you want to make these changes, and these are your recommendations. Next, I wanted to also, this is my last section of this presentation, and then we can move on into questions. But I wanted to talk about how to choose UX processes, methods, and techniques. Within any given project, you have to choose UX processes, methods, and techniques for the UX lifecycle activities and sub-activities. So to summarize, in this illustration, we show the mapping from project parameters to possible choices of the UX methods. While there are some general guidelines for making these mapping choices, fine-tuning is the job of project teams, especially the project manager or product owner. If you've never heard of that term before, a product owner is the person responsible for the success of the product and for pursuing business goals. So this is kind of the part where it's not really your job anymore as a UX designer. You're kind of just trying to communicate with the other members of your team on how to best design this product and how to move forward. And so they're going to help you fine tune these mapping choices. And much of this is intuitive and straightforward. So even if your team is not, using this visual to move forward with their process, you're likely doing a lot of things on this list. You'll be analyzing your project risk, your goals, the resources you have available, how much money do you have available, what softwares do you have available, how, what are your developers capable of, what is the developmental organizational culture? Is this a product that's going to do well with your organization? Is this a product that people are actually going to want to create and be excited about creating, and that will benefit your company? And then, you're going to move into mappings, your choices for mappings and that sort of thing, and what level of rigor you should be using, methods and techniques to use, all that fun stuff. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. So I definitely want to get around to some questions from you all. I did want to mention one more time, just really quickly, that if you need help building a UX portfolio, I am available to help you. That is a service I provide. So if you would like to email me at Catherine@fairbankstudios.com and get help on your UX design portfolio, I can help you do so. So do you have any questions? Do you have any feedback? Please leave them in the chat box. I'd love to know. I will close out the presentation now and get to your questions.